2. After fleeing Edo, Ikikuro and Oyu deliberately avoided the Tokaido Road, traveling toward the capital through the more remote Tosando route, hiding from public view. Ikikuro was constantly tormented by guilt for the crime of killing his master. However, Oyu, who had once been a maidservant at a disreputable tea house, would always spur him toward further misdeeds whenever he showed signs of sinking into depression. Now that you've become a wanted criminal, there's no point in brooding over it. The smart thing to do is to steel your nerves and live life to its fullest, she would say, pushing Ikikuro deeper into a life of crime day after day. By the time they reached Yabuhara on the Nakasendo Road in Kiso, Shinshu, they had less than 100 coins left. As their funds dwindled, they resorted to committing crimes to survive. At first, they worked together as a typical male-female con duo, with Oyu luring men into traps. From Shinshu to Owari, they robbed travelers of their money in the inns along the way. Initially, Ikikuro was reluctant, committing crimes only under Oyu's fierce instigation, but eventually, he began to find pleasure in it. The merchants and peasants, who were their victims, were remarkably submissive, even as Ikikuro, posing as a wandering samurai, took their money. As Ikikuro's criminal activities progressed, he moved from the con schemes with Oyu to more straightforward extortion, which required less effort. Eventually, he saw highway robbery and murder as legitimate work. He settled in Tori Pass, which connected Shinano and Kiso. By day, he ran a tea house, and by night, he committed robberies. He no longer felt any hesitation or unease about this life. He targeted travelers who appeared wealthy, killed them, and skillfully disposed of the bodies. By committing such crimes 3 or 4 times a year, he could easily support himself for an entire year. It was around the spring of the 3rd year since they had left Edo. Due to the passage of 2 processions of northern daimyos on their Sankin Kotai journeys, the inns along the Kiso Road had recently been unusually bustling. Especially during this time, travelers on pilgrimages to eyes from Shinshu, as well as Echigo and Echu, crowded the road. Among them were many who extended their trips as leisurely tours from Kyoto to Osaka. Ikikuro had his eye on some of these travelers, intending to kill 2 or 3 of them to fund his living expenses for the year. It was a twilight evening when the mountain cherry blossoms, mixed with the cedars and cypresses, had started to scatter along the Kiso Road. A man and a woman, clearly a married couple, stopped by Ikikuro's shop. The man appeared to be over 30, and the woman seemed to be around 23 or 24. They looked like a young wealthy farming couple from Shinshu on a carefree journey without any attendants. When Ikikuro saw how they were dressed, he thought to himself that these 2 could be his victims for the year. "We can't be far from Yabuhara now, can we?" said the man as he began to retie the straps of his straw sandals in front of Ikikuro's shop. Before Ikikuro could reply, Oyu came out from the kitchen and said, "Indeed, sir. Once you descend this pass, there's less than half a mile to go. Why not rest here for a little while?" Hearing her words, Ikikuro realized that Oyu was already urging him toward their usual deadly plan. The pass to Yabuhara was still more than 2 ri away, but Oyu had made it sound like the journey was almost over to put the travelers at ease. This was Ikikuro's customary method: lure the travelers into a false sense of security, wait until nightfall as they continued their journey, then ambush them on a side path just before they reached the inn. Upon hearing Oyu's words, the man said, "If that's the case, I think I'll have a cup of tea," and with that, he had already fallen into the first trap. The woman removed her travel hat, which was tied with a red cord, and sat down next to her husband. After resting for about half an hour to recover from the fatigue of climbing the pass, they placed a few coins on the table and descended Tori Pass, heading into the purple dusk that settled over the valley of Ogazo. As soon as the couple's figures disappeared from sight, Oyu signaled to Ikikuro. Like a hunter pursuing his prey, Ikikuro drew his short sword and rushed after the 2. He turned off the main road to the right and hurried along the steep path that followed the flow of the Kiso River. When Ikikuro arrived at the tree-lined path just before Yabuhara Inn, the long spring day had completely faded, and the 10-day-old moon was about to rise beyond the Kiso Mountains, casting a faint white light that barely illuminated the peaks. Hiding beneath a cluster of round-leaved willows growing along the roadside, Ikikuro patiently waited for the couple to approach. Deep down, he couldn't help but think about how sinful it was to unjustly take the lives of these two who were enjoying a happy journey. However, once he had set out on this task, it was not something he could abandon, especially not in front of Oyu. He didn't want to spill their blood. He hoped that they would obediently submit to his threats without putting up any resistance. He believed that if they surrendered their money and clothing, he would not have to resort to killing. Just as his resolve was solidifying, he saw the figures of a man and woman approaching quickly from the direction of the main road. They seemed exhausted from the unexpectedly long path from the pass and were helping each other along silently. As the couple drew near to the thicket of round-leaved willows, Ikikuro suddenly stepped into the middle of the road. He shouted the familiar threatening words he had used many times before. The man appeared to panic, drawing his sword while shielding his wife behind him. Ikikuro was momentarily taken aback but then encouraged himself, shouting, "Listen, travelers. Don't resist or you'll lose your lives. I'm not here to take your lives. Just hand over your money and clothing quietly." The man stared intently at Ikikuro's face and exclaimed, "Hey! Aren't you the owner of the tea house at the pass?" He then lunged at Ikikuro in desperation. Ikikuro thought this was the end. Since the man recognized his face, he realized he could no longer let this couple live for the sake of their own safety. As the man desperately lunged at him, Ikikuro skillfully sidestepped and delivered a swift strike to the back of his neck. The woman, seeing this, crumpled to the ground like a puppet cut from its strings, trembling uncontrollably. Ikikuro could not bring himself to kill the woman. However, he felt he could not prioritize his own danger over her life. As he brandished his bloody sword, he approached the woman, thinking that he should kill the man first while he was still in a murderous frenzy. The woman clasped her hands together and begged for her life. When Ikikuro met her gaze, he found it impossible to lower his sword. Still, he thought he must kill her. At that moment, Ikikuro's greed told him that it would be pointless to cut the woman and ruin her clothes. With that thought, he removed the handkerchief from his waist and strangled her. Once he had killed both of them, he suddenly felt the fear of having taken a life, and he could not bear to stay there even for a moment. He snatched their sashes and clothes and hurriedly fled the scene. Although he had killed more than 10 people up to that point, they had all been elderly men or merchants, people from such classes, and he had never before laid his hands on a young couple. He returned, plagued by deep remorse and guilt. Upon entering his house, he immediately threw the clothes and money of the couple towards Oyu, treating them like filthy things. Oyu, calm and collected, first examined the money. There was less than she had expected, just barely exceeding 20 ryo. When Oyu picked up the dead woman's kimono, she said, "Ah, this is a yellow-hued kimono with a crepe lining. But what about the woman's headpiece?" She looked back at Ikikuro with an accusatory gaze. "Headpiece?" Ikikuro responded partially. "That's right. The headpiece. With the yellow-hued kimono and a crepe lining, it's not something ordinary like a comb or hairpin. I caught a glimpse of it when that woman took off her sujigasa, a type of hat. It must have been a matching pair of tortoiseshell combs," Oyu stated assertively. Ikikuro had not even thought about the headpiece of the woman he had killed, and he had no way to respond. "Come on. You didn't forget to take it, did you? If so, it's certainly worth 7 or 8 ryo. You're not a novice thief, so what's the point of committing murder? To kill a woman dressed like that and not realize you missed her headpiece, when did you start this life of crime? What a foolish mistake for a thief to make. Speak up." Oyu confronted Ikikuro with a tone of authority. Ikikuro was deeply troubled by the regret of having killed 2 young people, and he was profoundly wounded by the woman's words. He did not feel any remorse for the mistake or incompetence of forgetting to take the woman's headpiece. He thought of the act of killing the two as a wrongdoing, yet in the heat of the moment, he completely forgot that the woman had nearly 10 ryo worth of decorations on her head. Even now, he did not feel regret for having forgotten. Although he had fallen into robbery and killed for profit, he did not feel guilty for not having gone so far as to devour the victim's bones like an evil spirit. Nevertheless, as he watched the clothing and undergarments of his slain counterpart exposed before him as tributes to the killer, he felt a pitiful depth of greed in his heart. This thought struck him as he realized that even a vile person like him had not escaped the allure of the headpiece that was carelessly cast aside. Oblivious to the inner turmoil brewing in Ikikuro's heart, Oyu said, "Come on. You should run over there. It would be foolish to hesitate when we've got something in our hands." She spoke with a triumphant expression, believing her reasoning was sound. However, Ikikuro remained silent and did not respond. "Oh. It seems I've touched a nerve by pointing out your mistakes. Are you really not going? Do you intend to let a nearly 10 ryo opportunity slip away?" Oyu pressed him repeatedly. Usually, Ikikuro would comply with whatever Oyu said, but at that moment, his heart was in a state of turmoil, so much so that her words did not even register in his mind. "I see you won't go, no matter what I say. Then I'll run over there myself. Where is it? Is it the usual place?" Oyu asked. Feeling an overwhelming disgust towards Oyu, Ikikuro actually found joy in the thought of her being away from him, even for a moment. "It's the usual place, just past the pine grove before Yabuhara Inn," Ikikuro spat out. "Well then, I'll go take care of it. Fortunately, it's a bright moonlit night." "Really, what a clumsy job this has turned out to be," he said, as Oyu lifted her hem, slipped on her sandals, and dashed off. As Ikikuro watched her retreating figure, he was filled with a sense of shame. Seeing the woman, whom he once loved, running off with bloodshot eyes to strip the hair from a corpse, he couldn't help but feel deep disgust for her. Moreover, even when he committed heinous acts, whether he was mercilessly killing or stealing money, he often found some strange justification for himself that diminished his sense of shame. However, when he quietly observed someone else committing a crime, the horror and disgrace became painfully clear in his eyes. Watching the woman, whom he had risked his life to possess, abandon all her feminine kindness to chase after a corpse like a wolf seeking its prey for a mere 5 or 10 ryo, Ikikuro could no longer bear to stay even a moment longer in this den of sin with her. As these thoughts surfaced, all the wrongdoings he had committed began to replay in his mind, gnawing at his conscience. The eyes of the woman he had strangled, the groans of the bloodied silk merchant, and the screams of the old man he had struck down coalesced to assault Ikikuro's conscience. He wanted desperately to escape his past, to flee from himself. Above all, he wanted to escape from Oyu, who was the very root of all his sins. He resolutely stood up. He wrapped a few pieces of clothing in a furoshiki and left the waistband he had stolen from the man earlier in his pocket without preparing anything else, rushing outside. But after running about 10 ken, he suddenly realized that all the money and clothes he possessed were stolen, causing him to turn back as if rebuffed, and he threw the clothes and money with all his might onto the entrance of his house. To avoid encountering Oyu, he ran swiftly along a path that was not a road, following the Kiso River. He had no specific destination in mind, he only wanted to escape even slightly, even just a bit farther away from the base of his sins.